Good afternoon to those of you who are joining us. We'll get started in a minute or two, but thank you for being here. While you're waiting, we'd love to know who's here. So in the chat box, please put your name and where you're from, and we'll get started in a minute or so. Hi, Karen. For those of you who are now logging in, welcome, welcome, welcome. We're going to get started soon, but please introduce yourself in the chat box. We'd love to know where you are joining us from. All right, starting to level out here. All right, I think we can get started. Good afternoon. Welcome to day 2 of the VTI. We are really happy you're here. Thanks for joining us on Tuesday, June 8th at 1 p.m. My name is Jamie Harris, and I am an Adult Education Program Specialist at the Maryland Department of Labor, and we are thrilled that you're joining us for the Virtual Training Institute. Today, we're going to talk about LESLLA learners, and before we jump into the presentation, we'd like to put a poll out there to find out your role in adult education. So we just launched a poll. Please indicate your role in adult education. And that should say ROLE, but indicate your role in adult education. Okay, so far it looks like a lot of ESL instructors. And then we have ABE instructors, instructional specialists, other program leadership staff. All right, let me end this poll and share the results. All right, ESL instructors are the biggest group that's with us, and we have some diversity as well. ABE instructors, other leadership staff, instructional specialists, and others. Thank you for being here. And so we're going to jump into the presentation. And it's funny because I'm actually the first person who's going to start off our session today, literacy education and second language learning for adults in Maryland. And so we're going to look at current state overview of findings and available support. And we have 4 learning objectives today. The first learning objective, which is on the next slide, is to provide an overview of LESLLA learners in the state of Maryland. Second objective is to provide findings and important takeaways for supporting the first L1 literacy needs of LESLLA learners. The third objective is to provide findings and important takeaways for supporting the second language literacy needs of LESLLA learners. And the fourth is to provide practitioners with a list of resources and community organizations supporting the LESLLA learner and English learner population at large within the state. So here they are, our 4 learning objectives for today. So we're going to start with an overview of LESLLA learners. And as I told you before, my name is Jamie Harris. And one of the levels I've taught in ESOL over the years, which has been my favorite, has been beginning literacy classes. Little did I know that there was a specific term for some of these learners called LESLLA learners. So over the next few minutes, I'm going to provide an overview of these learners. So who are LESLLA learners? The term LESLLA was adopted in 2005 as low educated second language and literacy acquisition for adults. In K-12, you may be familiar with the term SLIFE, students with limited or interrupted formal education. But for adult educators, we use the term LESLLA. And LESLLA learners are individuals, they're adults with little or no home language schooling or literacy who are now learning to read and write for the first time in a new language. They can be learners like this because they were in rural areas with limited resources, with cultural norms and gender role expectations. They resided in war-torn countries, they dwelled in regions of famine, or they lived in refugee camps where adult educational resources don't exist. So there are benefits. There are great contributions from LESLLA learners. And as you can see on the slide, we have sociocultural, civic, political, and economic contributors. Sociocultural contribution focuses on cultural factors. Civic political contributions include volunteering and engaging with governments, and economic contributions relate to economic growth through entrepreneurship and employment. Additionally, they come with differing perspectives, beliefs, attitudes, and relationships. So, we've looked at the benefits, and we're going through this very quickly. We have 4 panelists, and I'm really excited for you to hear the other panelists. But let's look a little bit at who are LESLLA learners. And research by Bigelow and Schwartz in 2010 divided it into 3 groups. We have pre-literate learners that are part of a community or culture that only uses oral language. This culture does not use print or is in the very early stages of using print in its language. Secondly, we have those who are non-literate. They are part of a community or culture with print literacy, but the individual did not learn print literacy skills and only relies on oral language. Thirdly, we have semi-literate learners who they know that print has meaning, but that individual cannot interpret the meaning of print. I want you to think a moment about your learners. In your ESOL classes, does this remind you of some of your learners? They may not have had print in their own culture. They may not have learned what the meaning of the print is. Maybe this reminds you of some of your learners. If you can think of anyone, you can put that in the chat. That would be great. So we're going to look at LESLLA learners in the United States. Jennifer, I see you say absolutely. LESLLA learners in the United States. So in 2019 alone, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees documented that a total of 86,531,669 refugees and asylees existed globally. According to the United Nations, in 2019, approximately 51 million of those migrants moved to the United States. Some others went to the United Kingdom, others moved to Canada, and others to Australia and other countries. So we have this population, a lot of them are a part of a refugee population, but the reality is there's a challenge in measuring LESLLA learners in the United States. Why? Because we currently measure literacy in adult education via standardized assessments. And those standardized assessments can't tell us which learners are LESLLA learners with low or limited or interrupted education. It can tell us their proficiency in a language skill, but it's not able to tell us about the educational and literacy attainment in the native country. So we have to look to self-reporting to assess this for our LESLLA learners. So here, what you see, this table was taken from LACES data. And for those of you who are not in Maryland, we use LACES as our database for a lot of our data that we report to NRS, the National Reporting System. This table shows from that data, table 6 that has self-reported information. And on this table, we have non-US based schooling as one of the areas that is self-reported. Out of this table 6, what we've done here is we've pulled out the information for individuals who reported no schooling or grades 1 to 5, which can reflect the interrupted education. So you'll see here FY20, FY19, FY18 going backwards, it's about 5%. And when we compare the information across the information and data from the United States, you can see that the percentage is a little lower. Of course, that's across the whole US. And so each state may have different percentages. It's a low percent. And you may be wondering, okay, well, that's low. Why do we need to talk about it? Why is it important? And so on the next slide, we'll look a moment at why this is important. Number 1, understanding our learners makes us better instructors. Understanding our learners makes us better instructors. Secondly, we can design within instruction. So there's no need to click the link. We'll just look at what's here on the slide, but we have universal design, making sure that what we have is usable by all teachers, by all people, excuse me. And then we have inclusive design, and it considers the full range of human diversity within an environment. So we as instructors, when we are teaching, we really need to design with all of our learners in mind. And the reality is when we do that to benefit one learner, we can benefit all of our learners. I see some comments here in the chat, and I want to acknowledge some of them. Charla says, yes, we have these lower learners in our program. Patricia says, yes, definitely. Cynthia, you've seen that as well. Oh, and Stephanie put, she previously taught a class of unaccompanied minors from Guatemala who were all LESLLA learners. And then we have a comment again from Cynthia, gone from minimal education to a medical doctor from Syria who needed to learn English to begin a residency at Johns Hopkins. Okay, so all of you have had some experience with this population. And I know I went very quickly, but hopefully that was helpful in helping you understand the group of people that we're talking about in this session today. I am thrilled to introduce you to Dr. Luis Javier Pentón Herrera, who will be talking about the second objective of our presentation today. Luis?
Thank you very much, Jamie, for the introduction and for setting the foundation here for our panel. Hi, everyone. My name is Luis, and I'll be talking today about considerations for teaching first language, or L1, literacy to LESLLA learners, lessons learned from a Spanish literacy program. And a few years ago, as part of my doctoral program, I was required to collaborate with a community organization to work on. It had to be a language and literacy project of my choice or the choice of the community organization. So I approached a community organization in the Baltimore area here in Maryland, and they were serving a large Spanish-speaking population of English learners at the time. And I do remember the education director. She shared with me that some of these learners were having difficulties learning English because they had limited or interrupted formal education from their time back in their native country. So although they could speak and understand Spanish, they couldn't read or write very well. So I thought that would be a wonderful project for me to do as part of my dissertation coursework. So I proposed first a Spanish literacy program for them to learn how to read and write, and then I designed the program. So this is a brief overview of the program here, and the issue identified was that some English learners were struggling with learning English. We can see here in this slide I was able to recruit 4 participants for my study, for the project. And you can see a little bit of information here about them: Telma, Tomas, both from El Salvador, and then Miguel and Elena. Miguel and Elena were mother and son, both from Honduras. And you can see there their proficiency in Spanish. They couldn't read or write or emerge in reading and writing in Spanish. And then the most, Elena and Telma, they received 6 years of formal schooling in native country in El Salvador and Honduras. But as you could see there, Tomas and Miguel, Tomas didn't have any formal education, and then Miguel only 3 years. So you can have a general idea here of the participants. And there were many lessons learned in the program, but here a little bit of information about the program. So how I divided the program into 8 different weeks. And then as you can see in the weeks, I assigned a particular topic that was very relevant to we cannot see the screen. I just saw one of the comments here. I'm able to see it. I hope it's
Luis, you
showing.
can continue. I'll troubleshoot with
Oh,
that
all right,
individual.
thank you. So we can see here program objective, I'm sorry, to help LESLA learners achieve intermediate, I apologize, reading and writing literacy skills in their first language, and so they can use that knowledge to learn English. So the program was designed with that purpose. Let's learn foundational reading and writing skills so we can learn English faster, right? And then the 8 topics that I selected were topics that this particular learners needed in their daily lives. So very, keeping andragogy in mind. Everything that you teach is with the purpose of application right outside of the classroom, right? But I connected those topics with grammar because we were focusing on print literacy, reading and writing. Okay. So in this next slide, because of the time, I'll briefly go over 4 primary lessons that I learned during this project. And again, I'll be glad to share more details afterward via email, but because of time, I can only focus on these 4 very briefly. So the first one, let's go over the first one on the next slide about student interest. Um, I feel that the student interest was one of the most important here. Student buy-in and interest were vital for recruitment. For example, in the beginning of the project, for me, it was difficult to recruit students because they were interested and they kept telling me, I'm interested in learning English, not Spanish, because they were thinking about application. They wanted to learn English, of course, for work and opportunities. So I had to explain to them. It was very important for them to hear me explain the benefits of learning how to read and write in Spanish and how they could use that knowledge to learn English better and faster. So that was something that was very important for students to hear. And then another important consideration is that the classes needed to be as interactive as possible to keep student interest and engagement. It cannot be lecture. That doesn't work. That we're interested in an application, it has to be interactive and it has to connect to their daily lives. Again, going back to andragogy and the principles of adult education. So we can see here one of the topics that I included in when I was sharing the previous slide was about, for example, the U.S. educational system, and that was particularly interesting to Telma because she was a mother who had a younger child in school, so she needed to learn more about the U.S. educational system, and learning about it in Spanish was very, very interesting to her. And then we can see here some bullet points of important information. Do not include formal assessments. That was very demotivating to learners. Connecting the knowledge learning L1 literacy, reading and writing in Spanish, to the second language L2 to promote engagement and keep students' interest. That was very, very, I would say, vital for keeping student interest in the class. So an example that I have here during the last 30 minutes of class, what we would do is that all the information that we learn about grammar, reading and writing in Spanish, I would connect that to English. And very important because many times they use Google Translate for their daily communications in English. If they don't know how to read or write very well in Spanish, Google Translate is not going to translate correctly. And the example that I kept telling them was the example of the first one. El pájaro tiene dos alas. The bird has 2 wings. The word alas is all together. But then if you separate it, yo voy a la tienda. I go to the store. So if you put to the a la together in Google Translate is going to show us win instead of to the, and little things like that. They really, really, they would be very, very interested about that. It was one of the biggest things for them about student engagement. So the next slide that we have. Classroom routines. As you can see here, this is how I divided the class because the class was twice a week, 2 hours every week, and or I'm sorry, 2 hours every class. So a total of 2 hour or 4 hours per week. Sorry, not a math major here, as you can see. So and then the last number 5, Spanish to English, that was very, very important for them. And sometimes they would actually encourage me to start the Spanish to English part of the class earlier because they really enjoyed that part of the class when we learn Spanish and then how they can use that into English. It's conjugations, things like that. So that's number 5. Then the next slide here, effects on their life. Every participant shared that the program had different effects on their life, but I think one that caught my attention the most was Telma. And as I shared with you, she was a mother who had a child in elementary school, a student in elementary school, and she said that this class is important for me because I did not study in my country, I now have a daughter and I need to learn English to be able to communicate at school and be able to help my child with her homework. English is very important, but also the Spanish program helped me a lot because I learned different things that I can also teach my daughter and for me too. And Thelma kept also emphasizing that she wasn't able before to teach her daughter how to read or write in Spanish because she had a little bit of interrupted education. She didn't feel comfortable. Also, she referred to Facebook and social media that many times she felt embarrassed to post things in Spanish because her reading and writing were not, what she felt was not good. So, and let's continue to the next slide because I know thank you, Jamie, for that. Sustainability of the program. Sustainability was one of the biggest issues here. Space was an issue because the Spanish class was only offered the same time and in the same space as the English class. So that was an issue because then students has to choose between Spanish or English. So that was a challenge. And then recruitment of volunteers. After I left as a Spanish instructor, it was very difficult to recruit another Spanish instructor who could teach foundational literacy to Spanish speakers. So that was another problem with the sustainability. And also participant interest. Again, if they had to choose between the ESOL class and the Spanish class, most of them will gravitate towards ESOL because they were offered the same space and the same time. So that was created tensions there. And then the last one, native language nostalgia. If we can go to the last one there. You know, these are 2 points that I want to stress, and I'm short on time, so I'll just leave this here for you, so you can read it, and we can share the PDF with you as well. But I did find that students felt this sense of nostalgic or sentimental value, that Spanish represented that nostalgic element or sentimental element value, but they felt that Spanish sadly did not was not practical for them to focus time or spend time in learning how to read and write in Spanish because that didn't provide economic support for them, or that didn't provide any economic opportunities for them here in the U.S. So they felt in a way this emotional transaction, that we're making this emotional transaction of I have to forget about learning how to read and write in Spanish and I have to focus in English because that takes priority. I have to find a job. I have to be able to communicate. And that emotional struggle was definitely took a toll. It affected their learning as well. And then next slide, I think. Okay, and then if you want to more information, again, I'm sorry because we're running out of time for my section, for my part here. So let me know if you will be interested in reading more about this. I did publish this information in a chapter. I'll be glad to send it to you. So I would like a question for the audience to end. What are your experiences teaching or supporting the development of first language literacy for your adult learners? And if you can share some thoughts here in your in the chat box, I would greatly appreciate it. And then as I read your comments, I'll be gladly introducing the next panelist, the wonderful Dr. Larry Condelli. He'll be presenting about second language literacy.
Okay, are we moving ahead then? Any comments in the chat box?
We have here, though our program is small, our students wanted to learn how to get a license. I had to teach the alphabet to my students. So we're definitely seeing here, Larry, that the audience here, the teachers at the audience, they definitely see an L1 literacy is an important element of learning a language here. I had to think like kindergarten teacher, more hands-on activities. Yes, definitely at that level. Well, Larry, I think this some of the comments here connect to your presentation, so I think that's wonderful.
Okay, great. Thank you, Luis. And that's a great study to start to introduce my section, because one of the strategies that is very effective with LESLLA learners is the native language literacy and the transferability of the native language to another language. So that was a good intro, and you'll be seeing that, hearing that more as I present. And Jamie told you a little bit about LESLLA learners, and here's what are some of the implications that has for teaching is if you're talking about someone who doesn't understand literacy and never had literacy, that student is not going to really understand the symbolism that's inherent in language. You know, language is like a code that we all kind of learn. If we learn it as a child, you know, the verbal sounds, but when you're writing it out, it's kind of like a code. And without that background, you don't understand that there's a symbolism behind language. Of course, a couple of people have mentioned having to teach the alphabet and phonemic awareness. That's lacking also. We don't really know that letters are associated with sounds, or know that very well, and don't even know things like word boundaries. Like you just all sound, it can all just look like when you're talking, all the words, we know how to segment it so that we hear words, but and we can write that down. But when you don't have literacy, that's very, very difficult to do. And even really low LESLLA learners, ones that have really not had any experience with school, will be unfamiliar with writing tools at all, like pens and pencils, certainly keyboards. They just won't really know that those are tools that you can use to create language, create writing. And one of the key things that I think is something that I've learned, and I'd like to ask you to reflect on a little bit too, is that when you have a literacy in one language, you can use that to transfer to another language. And you've probably heard of Chomsky, who's the theorist behind that, the linguist who demonstrates that quite convincingly. And so that's the thing about LESLLA learners. These are the challenges you'll have. Among them, there are others that they really lack those skills that you get in your first language to teach the second language. And then remember, LESLLA learners are also trying to learn English at the same time here in the United States. So before I go ahead, if you look at the next slide, one thing when in my research I've done on this, it's helped me to think about my own challenges when I learn a second language. Of course, none of us are LESLLA learners here today, and certainly I'm not. But we do have experiences learning other languages, most of us. Maybe you just had experience learning English. So I'd just like you to think about this transferability thing and what are the challenges you had learning a different language, or maybe it was English, and what did you find that was helpful to you? And I think you're going to see some of those when we talk about some of the strategies to jump ahead that we'll talk about. So just type in the chat box, just a couple of comments. We don't have a lot of time, but when you're learning another language, what are some things that challenges you've had and things that have helped you? Fossilization, contextual factors, personality, making connections between the language, retention, keeping a vocabulary notebook. Yes, vocabulary is difficult, oral repetition. Cognates, I know if you know cognates, like words that are similar in one language, then they mean basically the same thing in another language. A lot of, especially languages like English or Spanish that we have in English are helping us. Different sounds, pronunciation, watching TV I saw, which is something that learners tell us a lot that they learn, how they learn English. Practicing, a lot of practice. The different grammar structures, sometimes they're very different. I don't know what Hebrew is like, but some are very different, some are similar. At least we know that there's grammar. We know there's things like subjects and verbs, which LESLLA learners often do not know. French and Italian. Yeah, when you have like if you if you know Spanish and you're trying to learn French and Italian, that helps because of what I said, like cognates, similar structure of the language. Yeah, Arabic is fascinating, learning letters. Yeah, I'm always fascinated that people can read Arabic because it just seems like scribbles to me. But that's a really good one too, because that'll give you an idea of what LESLLA learners are seeing. If you look at a script, you just don't know Arabic. If you don't know Arabic or Russian even, you can see their characters are so different, like you have no idea. Chinese, definitely, unless you're a Chinese speaker, are gonna just look like nothing. We say sometimes in language teaching, it's just wallpaper. And that's actually one of the ways that you can tell a learner is learning when they realize it's not wallpaper anymore, Yeah, applying the language, living it, yes, actually practice. Okay, good. Because of time, I'm going to move on, but those are all things I think you're going to see when I talk about the research and what I've discovered. This is a couple of the strategies I'm going to give you, or the main strategy I'm going to give you, come from these sources. Over like 15 years, beginning in the late 90s, I did two studies on ESL literacy learners, one called the What Works study and the other literacy impact study, which was a experimental study. But mostly I'm going to talk about findings from the first one because it was broader. Then we looked at, as we were doing this project, to get some ideas and to see what are our findings making sense, we looked at the research, but there isn't very much research about LESLLA learners, or even about adult ed, even in general. But there is research about second language acquisition for adults. And they're not LESLLA learners, but we know how adults learn a second language, much as I was just trying to get you to think about your experiences. So there's some research about that. And there's also, particularly in England and the Netherlands, they've done a little bit further ahead of us in looking at LESLLA learners, particularly in the Netherlands. And some of that stuff has recently been translated, fortunately for us. So we looked at some of that research as well. And this is where all of the things I'm going to mention come from one of these four sources. So the next slide then, just want to very briefly, just for a second, tell you about the What Works study, because a lot of the data is going to come, findings are going to come from that. It was a very large study that went over 7 years with 2 years of data collection. And it was what we called a natural study, in that what we did was find 38 classes all over the country, 13 sites in 7 states, where there were mostly LESLLA learners. And I think, as Jamie said, that term didn't exist at the time, but we were low literate second language learners. And what we did was just follow them for 9 months, no matter how long they were in adult ed. We gave them an assessment right when they got intake, 3 months later, and 9 months later. And it didn't matter, and most of them had left after 4 or 5 months, unfortunately. But we still followed up as many as we could. We ended up finding about 60% of students over 9 months. And we gave them this assessment battery, which includes standardized assessments like CASAS and BEST. And we also did interviews, and we did some alternative assessments, both reading, writing, and speaking. And then to get the classroom data, we hired trained observers who every 2 weeks would sit in the class and code what the teacher did in a very elaborate coding scheme. And then we turned those codes and those test scores into a statistical analysis called hierarchical linear modeling. It's like a regression model. And then we find out where can we find statistically significant effects. And that's where this comes from. So the next, I'll just tell you some of the key findings in the time I have. One of the big findings was bringing in the outside, and that helped basic reading skills. And I saw a couple of mentions of that in the chat. So when you were reading something that is really, you can really connect to your everyday life, it's more meaningful and it promotes reading. So as a teacher, if you're doing these things, bringing in real life materials and bringing issues to in the classroom to what the learners are facing, bringing in the outside, as we say, that really helps basic reading growth. The other one that goes back to Luis's presentation, which is strategic use of the native language. So bringing in some of that native language literacy to bear on what you're teaching now. Now, you don't translate, I don't mean that. And I know some places, some schools, some teachers really don't like to use the first language at all. And we're not saying use the first language, but if you use it strategically, it does help in comprehension. And if you might think about, again, your own experience, sometimes you get to a point, you get this feeling like, if I just knew a couple of words, just knew some of the vocabulary, I could say this. Helping the learner that along in those ways helps them remove the comprehension barriers. Sometimes you need that support, that first language support. And by doing that in the classroom, you signal to the student that it's okay to do that. So it makes it safer. And it allows you to do some higher level things that are hard to translate. So things like concepts like freedoms and civil rights, or that you might want to teach in your ESL class, they're hard to translate those directly. So if you can just say it in whatever language there you can to get the learners to understand, it really moves that forward. In the next slide, this was brought up as well, giving a lot of practice in different ways. We found it when you did that, oral language skills increased significantly higher than teachers that didn't do this as much. So so in other words, giving multimodal learning, say it, speak it, write it, hear it, all the different things that you probably do in any ESL class, but they're particularly powerful for LESLLA learners. And it helps with oral language skills. It helps you learn from others, gives you an opportunity to practice and to test language hypotheses. You think, I think this is how you say it. You can hear it said either rightly or wrongly the way you think, and that helps oral language development. Okay, next slide. Some of the other, here's some that was from mostly my work study, but this is from the SLA research, second language acquisition research, which is done on adults, but not LESLLA adults, but adults who are learning a second language. We find some of the same things. If you have strong oral background, you can learn literacy faster. When it's in context, going back to bringing in the outside, you teach it in a contextual environment, what the learner really needs to know. That increases motivation, it helps learning. And again, native language support is highly supported in the research on second language acquisition. And that going back to that Chomsky theory I mentioned, that once you learn the basics of literacy in one language, it helps you learn literacy in a second language. And next slide, I know I'm running out of time. So if we go to the next slide. Okay, I guess we're stuck here. What do we have? Let me just look up here. I think I have some implications for instruction next I can talk about. Just want to talk about one other thing in one of my other studies. It's on the next slide. I don't know why it's not advancing, but at least it's not on my screen. Is direct teaching, explicit teaching. So if you teach something explicitly and not just assume they're going to figure out, in educated learners and people that have good literacy in another language can figure things out when you show a pattern. LESLLA learners, as I said, they don't understand language, they've not experienced, so you have to tell them, be very explicit. This is why you change this tense. This is why you use this particular adverb or whatever it is you're doing. This is why you're using this vocabulary. And then make learners aware of what the structure of a language. Again, that's particularly powerful with second language, with LESLLA learners, because they don't understand how language works. So if you tell them about it, bring them in on the process, don't let it be in the background, which I think we're kind of used to doing as we're more literate and educated learners that we are. We kind of know what's going on about language and how we're processing things like attention and reading and how to use reading comprehension strategies. LESLLA learners particularly do not know these, and if you teach those, you will also show some much faster growth. And the rest of my presentation is some ideas on implications for instruction. I don't really have time to go over them right now, but if you want to look at the slides later, there's some ideas on what to do in each of these categories. So we could just bring in the outside here, just to let you look at it since we're basically out of time. Environmental material, realia, neighborhood walks, Italian task-based listening, listening to TV, somebody mentioned broadcasts. I find that when I would meet learners, particularly in Europe, when I was doing some studies in Europe of LESLLA learners, they said, we watched American TV and that's how we learn a lot. So we can do that here too. I've watched Spanish TV to help me learn Spanish. Not that well, but I've tried that myself. Here's some community activities you can do. You can just keep going through Sherry, the slides, because I know I'm out of time. Here's ways for just some ideas about assignments you can give in class or after class, interviewing other students. Here's some examples of how to do native language, abstract concepts, vocabulary barriers. Just explain something when you see they're just not getting it. But again, I'll emphasize, don't translate. That's really counterproductive. But use it as an aid, as a supplement to what you're teaching. That's found to be very effective. And the next slide, I think. That's it. So yeah, look at the slides. There's a website, a LESLLA.org website I can talk about later that has a lot of ideas for teaching LESLLA learners from all over the world, from our international community. And for now, we'll turn it over to Sherry, who'll talk about Maryland. Will be a little closer to home.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Larry, and hello to everyone. Thank you all for joining us once again. As Larry mentioned, my name is Sherry Lyons, and I teach in the TESOL program at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, or UMBC. And to wrap up our presentation today, I'd like to share with you all a list of community organizations and resources in Maryland for LESLLA learners, as well as for English learners at large. And just to, excuse me, as a quick reminder of the objective for this portion of our presentation, it is to provide practitioners with a list of resources and community organizations supporting the LESLLA learner and English learner at large within the state. And before we dig in here, I'd like to do a quick poll with everyone just to find out where you are working with LESLLA learners and English learners in Maryland. And so your options are Western counties, Eastern counties, Northern counties, in the Southern counties, the Central counties. And for those of you who are not in Maryland, but joining us and who are interested in learning more about the resources that are available, you also have an option. So we'll take a moment to respond to the poll, please. Okay, so it looks like the bulk of you are in our central counties, Howard, Montgomery, Anne Arundel, Prince George's. Okay, and let's see, it looks like next would be in our northern counties of Cecil, Harford, Baltimore County, and Baltimore City, as well as Carroll County. And we do have a few who are joining us who are not in Maryland, so welcome. And then our western counties and eastern counties are rounding out the selections. Okay, very nice, thank you. Okay, I'm not sure why the slides suddenly don't advance, but sorry about that. Let's see, let me try to get rid of.
Sherry, would you like me to share the slides while you present your portion?
Yes, if that's possible. Let's see. Okay, here we go. It seems to be working now, but I may need you again, Jamie. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. So in the time allotted, and we're all working rather briefly here, we won't necessarily cover all organizations and resources in all 23 counties in Maryland, but we will touch on a few of them and highlight it. And not surprisingly, based on our poll, actually some of the counties that are starred here will be the ones in which we will highlight during this portion of the presentation. So you can see again down the middle, as well as at the northern end of Baltimore County of Baltimore City. We go west to Frederick and east to Talbot. Okay. And many of the organizations that we will highlight are, in addition to offering educational services, they also offer important wraparound services for learners. And the list of the organizations that we will highlight today are primarily based on a list that is a part of the newly released Maryland TESOL Handbook for Educators of English Learners. And just a reminder, anything that we don't get to touch on here in terms of the organizations, they are linked within the PowerPoint, so you're welcome to go back after and do a deeper dive. In fact, I encourage you to do so. Okay, and so the services that are offered by the organizations, as I mentioned, are quite a range, from advocacy all the way to other additional services. And so just to give a brief overview of how we're defining some of the terms. So for advocacy, as you can see, it involves immigrant services and legal services, although that's not the full extent, but those are some of the key areas that we are looking at when we think about advocacy that's offered. Educational services can be anything from language to literacy to GED to vocational training. Family services, some organizations may be offering child care as well as child rearing classes. They may also offer food services that may be needed. Health services can range from everything to physical and mental health, as well as dental health. Youth would be for unaccompanied minors, homeless and minor students, and additional would be anything that doesn't fall within those first 5 categories, such as newly arrived immigrants getting support to adjust to being in their new communities. It could be financial literacy that's offered, as well as support for victims and survivors of sex trafficking. And so we'll start in Montgomery County, and just a few of the organizations that are available there. To start with, Anna Brito, which offers, as you can see, a pretty good range from advocacy to health services. So adult ESOL classes for immigrant populations, digital literacy in the form of adult computer classes are offered, as well as workshops for civil and legal rights and responsibilities, and health and wellness screenings are offered. The Gilchrist Immigrant Resource Center offers a similar range of services, from ESOL classes to basic legal assistance, and as well as the digital literacy piece of computer classes, but they also add in native language literacy classes. The Literacy Council of Montgomery County, or LCMC, again, adult ESOL classes, as well as tutoring, GED and college prep, and workforce development. Spanish Catholic, which is a part of Catholic Charities and located in Gaithersburg, Maryland, again offers primarily educational services centered around ESOL classes for adult learners, as well as Spanish literacy and family literacy classes. And then moving into Prince George's County, La Clínica del Pueblo. The primary focus here, it's on health literacy, health and wellness needs of the Central American Latino communities. They serve, again, PG County as well as Montgomery County, and moving into surrounding Washington, D.C. And here, the Safe Center at the University of Maryland offers important services for survivors of human trafficking, as well as mental health services and legal services. Baltimore County, Soccer Without Borders. This one is an interesting organization, with soccer being the vehicle through which they foster a sense of camaraderie and a physical outlet for those who are participating in their services. And this is for newcomer refugees and immigrant youth. And they're offering, again, a range of academic services. Baltimore City, the Esperanza Center, also a part of Catholic Charities, and they offer, again, the full range of services from ESOL classes to immigration and legal services and assistance for victims of human trafficking. Again, I'm going through these rather quickly, but you can, just as a reminder, you're welcome to, once you have access to the PowerPoint, to click on the links so each of the names are linked to the websites, and you can do a much deeper dive here. And then the Maryland Office for Refugees and Asylees, or MORA, located in Baltimore City. It's, although they don't offer direct services, they do support many of the programs throughout Maryland who do offer important services for, again, LESLLA learners as well as English learners at large. And as you can see, it ranges from financial to health to employment and everything in between. And then the Refugee Youth Project, also in Baltimore City, and this one, again, offering safe spaces and supportive environments to help learners to improve their literacy skills. And then going east to Talbot County, we have the Chesapeake Multicultural Center. And although they're located in Talbot County, they do support some of the other surrounding eastern counties, and they offer adult education classes, English classes, and direct services for legal and immigration, as well as health services. And then lastly, we have Frederick County on the west, and the Literacy Council of Frederick County, like the Literacy Council of Montgomery County, they offer adult ESOL classes, one-on-one tutoring with a priority that's given to students who are at the lowest levels of English proficiency. Okay, and then lastly is RISE here in Frederick County. And again, they're serving all of Western Maryland, even though they are located primarily in Frederick County. And part of their mission is really to elevate and empower the immigrant communities of Western Maryland. And they are helping to create those sanctuary spaces where people can feel safe. Alrighty. And so as you may have noticed, or as I mentioned earlier, the organizations are offering direct services to learners, but I also wanted to include resources for practitioners in Maryland. And so just briefly, I'll mention MACE, or the Maryland Association for Adult Community and Continuing Education. So for those of us who are serving adult learners, this one is an important one. And if you go to their website, they also link to COABE. Maryland TESOL, the Adult Education Interest Section, also serves the needs of those of us who are working with adult learners, adult ESOL learners. The Skilled Immigrant Task Force Resource Guide. This one is a great resource for practitioners who are looking for information that specifically will help skilled immigrants who are in Maryland. And then outside of Maryland, there's the LESLLA website and the Atlas website. And those two are more research-based in terms of their offerings, but they do offer a great deal of resources in terms of instructional resources for those of us who are working specifically with LESLLA learners. Okay. And so for a quick question for the audience, I'd like to be able to add to the list. And so I'll ask using the chat, what suggestions do you all have for resources and community organizations to add to the list? In which Maryland county or elsewhere, for those of you who are outside of Maryland, are the resources or organizations found? And so if you wouldn't mind sharing a few in the chat, and let's see if I can access the chat here and still. Okay, I'm not seeing a few things pop in, but I'm sorry, Jamie, for some reason I see the chat, but I'm much like advancing some of the slides, it's not really moving down much.
So we currently don't have any responses to that specific question, but
Okay.
here we go. Facts for resources in PG counties, a comment here. Natalie, maybe you'll like to explain what you mean by that. Monica put parent resource centers in Title I schools.
Great.
Jennifer put Judy Center, local library system, DSS.
Excellent.
In Southern Maryland.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you all. So I would love to include that additional information that the audience members have shared on the slide, and so that we can create a growing list of available resources, not only for our learners, but also for us as practitioners. Okay. And once again, for some reason, okay. Alrighty, and so that is a wrap. That brings us to the end, and in the remaining moments that we have, if there are any questions for me or for everyone on the panel, you're welcome to pop those into the chat space for us. And again, we thank you.
So there are a couple more comments here
Okay.
that we can read through. Worcester Gold in Worcester County, International Rescue Committee in Baltimore City. For community members in Montgomery County, linkages to learning, libraries, Impact Silver Spring, Identity, Montgomery College, AELG. We have quite a few resources. In Oregon, we developed a good partnership with our local employment department, who were able to provide a lot of support for digital access. We have some requests for email information to be shared in the chat. So panelists, if you can put your email in the chat, that would be wonderful.
Yes.
And make sure it goes to panelists and all attendees. While we wait for all the panelists to put their email addresses in, I'm going to put two links here. One is a feedback survey, and one is a proof of participation. For those of you who need a proof of participation for your attendance at the VTI, please wait till you've attended all the sessions and then complete that link for the proof of participation. We want to thank you. Sherry, Luis, Larry, is there anything you want to add before we end today's session?
I just want to thank everyone, Jamie, for joining us, and I hope the information that we share was helpful to everyone.
Yes, thank you all for joining us, and it was a pleasure to work with my fellow panelists on this.
Yes, thank you, everybody. I'll put my email in the chat, as well as the link to the LESLLA website, which is a lot of resources for instruction and other things.
Okay, I don't see any questions in the chat. We see some thank yous. Thank you for joining us, everybody. Some comments, some positive comments. So I think we're going to end our session today. Panelists, can you believe we made it through the whole session in an hour?
Yeah.
Well done.
We did.
So thank you, everyone, for joining us this afternoon. Have a great Tuesday, and enjoy the rest of the VTI.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.